Hello, and welcome to The Unseen Question. Religion has always been sold as truth, and yet when you begin to look closely, it's filled with claims that crumble the moment you ask even the simplest questions. These myths survive not because they make sense, but because people are told from childhood that doubting them is dangerous. Take the idea that faith itself is a virtue. Entire generations are raised to believe that believing without evidence makes you morally superior. But in any other area of life, that would sound absurd. If someone told you they had a cure for a disease but refused to provide proof, would you admire their conviction, or would you see it as reckless? Another widespread belief is that morality comes from religion, that without a God dictating right and wrong, humans would descend into chaos. But history tells a very different story. Some of the worst atrocities were committed by people claiming divine authority. Meanwhile, countless societies with little or no exposure to organized religion developed moral systems based on empathy, cooperation, and fairness. Morality isn't handed down from the sky. It's built from human experience and the understanding that we all want to live in a world where suffering is minimized. Then there's the myth that prayer works. People are told that if they just pray hard enough, a higher power will heal, provide, or guide. Yet study after study shows that prayer doesn't outperform chance. When prayer seems to work, it's usually coincidence, selective memory, or the natural course of events. And when it doesn't, the blame shifts back onto the believer. Maybe they didn't pray correctly or with enough faith. It's a rigged system that protects the claim from ever being disproven. A similar illusion surrounds the idea of divine protection, the notion that if you're faithful, you'll be shielded from harm. But natural disasters, disease, and accidents don't discriminate between believers and non-believers. Churches collapse in earthquakes just like any other buildings. Pastors die in the same hospitals as everyone else. The evidence points to a reality that operates on natural laws, not on favoritism from above. Consider the story of creation as literally true. The idea that the universe, Earth, and all life were made in just a few days, a few thousand years ago. Even when mountains of evidence show the Earth is billions of years old, many cling to the story because it feels safer than facing the vastness and indifference of reality. This myth isn't just harmless, it spreads distrust of science, leaving people vulnerable to misinformation far beyond religion. One of the more troubling lies is the claim that suffering has a purpose, that tragedies happen because of a plan, or to test faith, or to build character. This framing allows people to excuse terrible injustice. It tells the grieving parent that their child's death was necessary. It tells the abused person that their pain is part of some grand design. Instead of empowering people to confront and reduce suffering, it teaches them to accept it as sacred. There's also the persistent claim that holy texts are perfect, timeless guides. Yet these books are full of contradictions, outdated laws, and passages that reflect the prejudices of the times in which they were written. When followers are faced with difficult verses, commands to kill, to enslave, to silence women, they're often told to reinterpret or ignore them. If the words were truly divine, they wouldn't need constant reinterpretation to fit modern values. Another belief is that religion unites people. In reality, it often divides. Wars, discrimination, and persecution have been justified by competing claims of divine truth. Even within the same religion, small differences in interpretation have sparked centuries of conflict. Meanwhile, cooperation across beliefs usually happens not because of religion, but despite it. Some hold on to the idea that religious leaders are closer to truth or morality than ordinary people. Yet scandal after scandal exposes corruption, abuse, and hypocrisy at the highest levels. The robes, rituals, and titles give an illusion of authority, but at the end of the day, they are just people, fallible and capable of the same failures as anyone else. A subtler myth is that belief provides meaning, while disbelief leaves only emptiness. But meaning isn't something handed down, it's something we create through relationships, curiosity, creativity, and striving for a better world. Far from emptiness, that's a source of meaning that doesn't vanish when myths are questioned. Many still believe religion is harmless as long as it gives people comfort, but comfort built on falsehood can carry a heavy cost. When people reject medical treatment for faith healing, children die. When leaders justify intolerance with scripture, lives are ruined. When resources are poured into building monuments to gods instead of addressing human needs, suffering grows. The harm isn't abstract, it's measurable and real. At the root of all these myths is the idea that questioning is dangerous, that doubt is a weakness. But doubt is the first step toward knowledge. Every advancement in human history came from someone refusing to accept what they were told. If that spirit is stifled in the name of faith, progress stalls. Even today, new myths are being crafted to fit modern sensibilities. Stories about how science and religion are perfectly compatible, or how all religions really point to the same truth. These attempts to repackage belief are often more about survival than sincerity. The core claims still rest on faith without evidence, and that hasn't changed. The persistence of these lies shows how powerful tradition and community can be. Beliefs passed down through generations can feel like facts, even when they collapse under scrutiny. But holding on to them doesn't make them true. It only delays the inevitable reckoning with reality. Every major myth we've looked at shares one thing in common. It asks people to ignore evidence in favor of authority, to accept comfort in place of clarity, to trade curiosity for obedience, and yet the very progress humanity has made, medicine, technology, human rights, came from rejecting that trade. As more people begin to question, the old lies lose their grip. The myths don't vanish overnight, but cracks spread, and eventually the weight of reality is too much to ignore. People discover that you don't need holy lies to live a meaningful, moral, and connected life. You only need the courage to face reality as it is. Another myth that holds on stubbornly is the idea that death isn't really the end, that there's an afterlife waiting, where everything wrong in this world will be corrected. It's one of the most comforting lies religion has ever created, and one of the hardest for people to let go of. The promise of seeing loved ones again, of justice being served, of eternal peace. It sounds beautiful, but there's no evidence that consciousness continues after death. Every bit of research into the brain shows that our thoughts, memories, and identities are tied to physical processes. When those processes stop, there's nothing left to sustain awareness. Belief in the afterlife often distracts from the real importance of life right now. It makes people tolerate injustice because they're told rewards will come later. It makes some neglect the planet because they believe a better world is waiting elsewhere. The truth is, this life is the only one we know we get, and that makes it infinitely more precious. Connected to that is the myth of eternal punishment, the idea that if you don't follow the right rules, you'll suffer forever. Hell is one of the most effective tools of control ever invented. It frightens people into obedience and discourages them from asking questions. But think about what this myth actually says. A supposedly loving creator is willing to torture people without end for mistakes or doubts during a short lifetime. It's not just implausible, it's morally grotesque. The belief in eternal punishment doesn't teach compassion. It teaches fear, and fear is a poor foundation for morality. Another belief that still shapes millions of lives is that humans are inherently sinful, that we're broken from birth, guilty before we even take our first breath. This doctrine doesn't just demean human dignity, it fosters shame, guilt, and obedience. By convincing people they're flawed at their core, religions position themselves as the only solution. Yet when you look at human behavior, what you see isn't inherent wickedness, but complexity. We're capable of selfishness and cruelty, yes, but also of kindness, generosity, and love. The myth of original sin reduces humanity to something unworthy, when in reality, our capacity for growth and empathy is what makes us extraordinary. One more enduring myth is that religious belief is universal, that everyone deep down believes, and those who don't are just in denial. But surveys consistently show that disbelief is real and growing. Entire generations are living full, meaningful lives without belief in gods. The claim that disbelief is impossible serves only to dismiss people's experiences. It's another way of saying, if you don't agree with me, you must be wrong about your own mind. That's not truth. That's projection. There's also a widespread myth that religious traditions have always been the same, preserved perfectly from their origin. In reality, every religion has changed, fractured, and adapted countless times. Texts were edited, doctrines reinterpreted, rituals reshaped. What people call timeless truth is usually a patchwork of historical accidents and political decisions. This flexibility isn't evidence of divinity, it's evidence of human invention. Consider the myth that religious charity proves divine goodness. Yes, many believers do good works, but kindness doesn't require belief, and charity isn't exclusive to religion. In fact, some religious charity comes with strings attached, conversions, conditions, or the spreading of doctrine alongside aid. Real compassion doesn't demand allegiance. It acts simply because suffering needs to be eased. Another subtle but common lie is the claim that doubt itself comes from evil forces, that if you question, it's not because your mind is working as it should, but because something sinister is influencing you. This belief keeps people from trusting their own reason. It teaches them to fear their own thoughts. But doubt isn't corruption. It's a sign of honesty. It's what allows us to sift truth from falsehood. Many still believe that religious rituals, baptisms, blessings, sacred objects carry supernatural power. Water sprinkled on a baby's head doesn't protect them from harm. Words whispered over a wafer don't change its nature. A cross around your neck doesn't shield you from accidents. These rituals can carry symbolic meaning, but the claim that they hold actual supernatural power is another unfounded lie. Then there's the persistent claim that religion and science occupy separate realms and therefore can never conflict. But they do conflict, often directly. If a religion claims the earth is only a few thousand years old, science proves otherwise. If it claims diseases are caused by sin, medicine shows its germs and viruses. This myth of harmony is often used to protect belief from scrutiny, but it doesn't change the fact that many religious claims about reality have been tested and found false. One of the biggest lies still repeated is that religion is necessary for hope, but hope doesn't depend on myths. Hope can be found in the resilience of people, in the progress of knowledge, in the connections we form, and in the possibilities of the future. Real hope doesn't rest on promises we can't verify. It rests on the things we can build together. When you line up all these holy lies, faith as virtue, morality from above, prayer as power, holy texts as perfect, suffering as purposeful, afterlife and hell as certainty, it becomes clear they share one function. They control. They keep people within the bounds of belief, not through evidence, but through fear, tradition, and emotional appeal. And yet, what makes this conversation worth having isn't just the exposure of falsehoods, it's the reminder that we don't need them, that the human mind is capable of seeking truth without crutches, that the human heart is capable of love without threats, that the human community is capable of building meaning without myths. Another lie that gets repeated endlessly is that without religion, life has no ultimate purpose. It's framed as though the universe must revolve around a grand plan in order to be meaningful. But purpose isn't something imposed from the outside. It's something we create, day by day. The belief that life requires a cosmic script is actually disempowering. It suggests that without divine authorship, our existence is empty. Yet the opposite is true. When meaning comes from within, it's flexible, personal, and real. It doesn't depend on authority, and it doesn't collapse when the story of gods is questioned. There's also the claim that religious identity is essential to culture. People are told that giving up religion means giving up tradition, family bonds, or community. But cultures evolve, traditions change. What makes a community strong isn't the myths it repeats, but the values it chooses to uphold. Respect, cooperation, celebration of life. Those don't require belief in invisible beings. They can thrive in secular spaces just as well, sometimes better. Another lie, often repeated in softer tones, is that religion makes people humble. The idea is that by acknowledging a higher power, believers avoid arrogance. But in practice, many forms of belief do the opposite. They claim special access to truth, superiority over non-believers, or chosen status above the rest of humanity. That's not humility. That's entitlement dressed up as reverence. True humility comes from recognizing limits, admitting ignorance, and treating others as equals. None of that requires holy lies. The myth of divine justice still holds many captive. The belief that even if people escape justice here, they'll face it in the next life. On the surface, it seems comforting, but it often discourages real accountability. Instead of demanding justice now, people are told to wait for cosmic punishment later. It allows the powerful to exploit and the oppressed to endure, believing that balance will come elsewhere. In reality, justice is something humans must fight for here, or it won't happen at all. Another lie is that religion explains mysteries. For centuries, gods were used to explain thunder, disease, or the stars. Today, many still believe that unanswered questions must point to the divine. But history shows what happens when you plug gods into the gaps of knowledge. Those gods shrink with every discovery. Lightning isn't Zeus. Disease isn't punishment. The stars aren't lanterns hung in the sky. Using myth as explanation is just a placeholder for ignorance. And ignorance doesn't need decoration. It needs curiosity. Some myths are small but persistent, like the belief that religious symbols hold universal power. People assume that a Bible in a hotel drawer must mean something deeper than marketing by religious groups, or that a church steeple rising above a town proves divine favor. These things only mean what people project onto them. Without belief propping them up, they're just books, buildings, and objects. The power is entirely in the minds of those who accept the story. Another myth, repeated especially by religious leaders, is that doubt leads to despair, that once faith slips away, life becomes bleak, but evidence points in the opposite direction. Many who leave behind religious myths report relief, clarity, and a deeper appreciation for life. Without the pressure to defend contradictions or live under constant guilt, they often describe a sense of freedom. If despair comes, it's not from doubt, it's from the fear instilled by being told all your life that doubt is deadly. There's also the stubborn idea that religion is the guardian of family values, as though love, loyalty and responsibility require religious instruction. But families exist across cultures, across beliefs, and across history. What strengthens families isn't religion, it's care, communication, and support. And ironically, many religious rules have historically broken families apart: shunning, forced marriages, punishment for leaving the faith. The myth that religion protects family often masks the ways it has harmed them. Another holy lie is that religion is harmless if taken symbolically. Some argue that myths don't have to be literally true to be useful. But even symbolic belief shapes thinking. If you treat myths as metaphor, you still normalize the idea that believing without evidence is a virtue. That unquestioned authority deserves respect. Even when softened, those patterns spill into politics, education, and daily decisions. And when literalists use the same myths to harm, symbolic believers often provide cover by insisting it's all just poetry. One of the oldest and most dangerous lies is that suffering proves devotion, that enduring pain or hardship for the sake of faith makes someone noble. This lie has justified everything from fasting and self-denial to violent martyrdom. But suffering in itself has no moral value. What matters is whether suffering is reduced, prevented, or overcome. The glorification of pain only distracts from the responsibility to make life better. There's also the persistent myth that religion is the default state of humanity, that people naturally believe, and disbelief is an unnatural rebellion. But children don't begin life with doctrines, they begin with curiosity. Religion steps in to fill that space with ready-made answers. Disbelief isn't rebellion, it's simply what happens when people recognize that the answers don't hold up. When we add up all these lies about purpose, culture, humility, justice, mystery, family, suffering, and human nature, it becomes clear how much weight they carry. They're not just abstract ideas. They shape laws, education, healthcare, and personal decisions every day. They influence who people marry, how they raise their children, who they vote for, and how they see outsiders. These myths aren't harmless. They ripple through society in countless ways, and yet when exposed, they often collapse quickly. A single moment of honest questioning can undo years of conditioning. A child asking why prayer didn't save their pet. A student realizing their textbook doesn't match their holy text. A worker noticing that their honest, kind, non-believing colleague lives with as much purpose as anyone else. Truth doesn't need to be forced, it only needs space to breathe. Another enduring lie is that religion is a force for peace. The claim is that faith brings people together, prevents conflict, and encourages forgiveness. But history paints a very different picture. Wars, crusades, inquisitions, and acts of terror have been justified with religious language. Even today, violence often erupts over differences in belief. While individuals may use religion as a personal guide to kindness, the institutions themselves have repeatedly sown division. Real peace doesn't come from declaring divine authority. It comes from cooperation, empathy, and respect for human dignity. There's also the myth that holy texts predicted modern science. Some point to vague verses and claim they describe the Big Bang, genetics, or the shape of the Earth. But these so-called prophecies are usually nothing more than retroactive interpretations. Ancient texts contain poetry, metaphor, and guesswork, but not scientific insight. If they truly contained advanced knowledge, humanity wouldn't have had to struggle for centuries to uncover it. We wouldn't need telescopes, microscopes, or laboratories to confirm what was supposedly written long ago. The fact that believers must bend the texts to fit discoveries shows the myth for what it is. Another lie is that religious traditions are eternal, untouched by human hands. In reality, most rituals and doctrines have been borrowed, adapted, or invented over time. Holidays overlap with older pagan festivals. Sacred stories mirror myths from earlier cultures. Even key symbols were often recycled. The idea of untouched, divine originality is simply false. Religion evolves because it's a human creation, and like all human creations, it changes with context and power struggles. The myth that belief is a personal choice, free from pressure, also deserves scrutiny. In practice, religion often thrives on indoctrination, social expectation, and fear of consequences. Children are taught before they can reason. Communities impose conformity. Questioning can mean losing family, friends, or even safety. Calling this a free choice ignores the heavy weight of conditioning and coercion. Belief often isn't chosen, it's imposed. Another persistent lie is that miracles are evidence of the divine. Stories of healings, visions, and supernatural events are repeated as though they prove truth. But miracles always share a pattern. They're either unverified, exaggerated, or indistinguishable from natural explanations. If miracles truly happened, we'd see consistent, verifiable events that defy natural law. Instead, what we get are anecdotes that collapse under scrutiny. The myth of miracles survives not on evidence, but on the hope that maybe, just maybe, the extraordinary is hiding in the ordinary. The claim that religion answers the big questions is also misleading. When asked about origins, purpose, or destiny, religions provide answers that are comforting but untested. Science, philosophy, and human creativity are the real tools for exploring these questions. Religious answers may feel satisfying because they close the book quickly, but satisfaction isn't the same as truth. The myth here is that an answer, any answer, is better than uncertainty. But uncertainty is honest, and honesty is the foundation of real discovery. Another holy lie is that morality without religion is relative, unstable, or dangerous. But morality has always been relative, even within religion. What was once considered righteous, slavery, stoning, holy war, is condemned today. Meanwhile, secular societies often score higher on measures of equality, well-being, and justice. The myth that religion anchors morality ignores the reality that humans continuously redefine what's right, and usually for the better, by questioning old standards. Then there's the myth that religious belief is necessary for hope in the face of death. This is one of the most powerful lies because it preys on fear. But hope doesn't have to rest on fantasies of eternal reward. Hope can come from knowing that your life mattered, that your actions left a mark, that your love and kindness shaped others. Legacy is real, and so is the ripple effect of our choices. We don't need myths about eternity to appreciate the significance of a finite life. Another subtle myth is that religion is the only path to transcendence, the sense of awe and wonder that lifts people beyond themselves. But transcendence can be found in music, art, science, nature, and human connection. The vastness of the cosmos, the complexity of life, the depth of creativity. All of these can evoke wonder far beyond what myths provide. Religion doesn't own awe, it only claims it. The lie that obedience to authority is sacred still lingers in many traditions. Leaders claim their authority comes from divine appointment, placing themselves above accountability. But unquestioned authority has always been a danger to human freedom. Whether in politics or religion, power that cannot be questioned leads to abuse. The sacredness of obedience is a myth that protects institutions, not individuals. Even the claim that religion is fading away can be deceptive. While traditional forms of belief are declining in many places, new movements, cults, and spiritual trends are rising to take their place. People are drawn to certainty, comfort, and community. This shows how persistent the need for myth can be. But it also shows that these myths are adaptable, not eternal truths, but tools reshaped to fit the times. When all of these lies are placed side by side, a pattern emerges. Religion thrives not because its claims are true, but because they fulfill emotional needs: certainty, comfort, belonging, control. The myths survive because they serve psychological functions, not because they match reality. And yet, reality is always there, waiting. The strength of truth isn't that it soothes, it's that it holds up under pressure. Lies, no matter how sacred, eventually crack when exposed to scrutiny. And once they crack, people discover that living without them isn't emptiness, it's freedom. Freedom to seek real answers, to build genuine connections, and to face life with honesty rather than illusion. Another deeply rooted lie is that religion is the foundation of civilization, that without gods, temples, and commandments, humans would have never built societies. But archaeology and anthropology tell another story. Long before organized religion, humans gathered, traded, created art, and buried their dead with care. Cooperation and culture came first. Religion was layered on top later, often as a way to solidify authority and explain what people didn't yet understand. Civilization didn't grow out of holy laws. It grew out of human need to survive, adapt, and thrive together. There's also the myth that religious conversion is always a matter of personal revelation. Stories are told of sudden, divine encounters that change lives instantly. But when you look closely, conversion usually happens through social pressure, emotional vulnerability, or life crises. People are drawn in by community, ritual, or the promise of answers, not by divine lightning bolts. The myth of dramatic conversion hides the far more human processes at work. Another popular lie is that religion is tolerant and welcoming, that all faiths at their core are about love. Yet tolerance is often conditional. Many religions welcome outsiders only if they're willing to eventually conform. Those who reject the teachings are often excluded, condemned, or even persecuted. True tolerance doesn't depend on eventual conversion. It respects differences without strings attached. The myth of religious tolerance science thrives on selective storytelling, not reality. The idea that religious belief is unique to humans is also exaggerated. Studies of animal behavior show rudimentary ritual, mourning, and even awe-like responses among other species. This suggests that what we call religion may simply be an extension of natural tendencies toward pattern-seeking and meaning-making. The claim that gods separate humans from animals is another myth, one that inflates our sense of specialness while ignoring the continuity of life. Another lie is that religion is primarily about love and kindness, and that harmful teachings are just misinterpretations. But when harmful verses and doctrines are written directly into the texts, it's not a matter of misinterpretation, it's part of the foundation. Commands to kill, exclude, or silence aren't accidents. They're there in black and white. To dismiss them as misunderstandings is to ignore the actual content. The myth of a purely benevolent religion survives by selective reading, not by honesty. There's also the claim that religion is the only source of comfort in times of crisis. People often point to prayer or rituals during grief or disaster as proof of their necessity. But comfort can come from many places, from family, community, therapy, art, or simply the passage of time. Religion doesn't hold a monopoly on healing. The myth that it does is repeated because it reinforces its own role. Yet countless people have faced tragedy with strength and resilience outside of faith. Another subtle but damaging lie is that rejecting religion means rejecting wonder, mystery, or imagination. In reality, questioning myths often deepens wonder. The universe revealed by science is far more awe-inspiring than any ancient story. Galaxies billions of light years away, quantum particles behaving in strange ways, the complexity of DNA, all of this outshines myths that claim the world was shaped in a week. Wonder doesn't vanish with truth, it expands. The myth that religion is the best cure for fear is also misleading. Fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, fear of chaos. Religion promises to soothe all of these, but it does so by replacing one fear with another. Instead of fearing death, believers are told to fear eternal punishment. Instead of fearing uncertainty, they're told to fear doubt. Instead of fearing chaos, they're told to fear disobedience. It's a trade, not a solution. True courage comes not from hiding behind myths, but from facing fear honestly. There's also the enduring claim that without religion, art and beauty would vanish. But some of the greatest achievements in art, literature, and music were created outside religious themes. And even when art was religious, it was often funded by institutions rather than inspired by genuine belief. Today, secular artists continue to create works that move, inspire, and transform. The myth that beauty depends on belief ignores the creativity that flows from human imagination itself. Another lie that people cling to is that religion is eternal, that it will always be here because it's part of human nature. But history shows that beliefs rise and fall. Entire pantheons, once worshipped by millions, are now myths studied in textbooks. Temples once seen as the center of the world now stand in ruins. The gods of today may seem eternal, but so did the gods of Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia. The myth of religion's permanence is one more story told to keep people from questioning its place. When we strip away these lies, what's left isn't despair, it's clarity. The myths survive because they offer comfort, control, and identity, but none of those require falsehoods. Humans are capable of building meaning, creating beauty, facing fear, and forming communities without deception. The truth may not promise eternity, or divine justice, or magical comfort, but it offers something stronger, reality that can be tested, knowledge that grows, and a future shaped by our choices. And when the holy lies are finally recognized for what they are, people discover something liberating. Life doesn't need them, humanity doesn't need them, and the world is richer, clearer, and more honest without them. The last lie worth exposing might be the most subtle of them all, the idea that questioning these myths makes you a worse person. That doubt is a flaw, that skepticism is arrogance, and that walking away from belief is a betrayal of family, culture, or morality. This lie is powerful because it attacks people at the core of their identity. But the truth is, asking hard questions is an act of integrity. It takes courage to hold beliefs up to the light, knowing they might not survive the inspection. Far from making someone worse, doubt is the path to honesty, growth, and freedom. Once these myths are seen for what they are, the illusion starts to fade. And when the illusion fades, the real world comes into sharper focus. The laughter of a child isn't diminished by the absence of divine authorship. It becomes more precious. The night sky isn't less beautiful without gods lighting the stars. It's more awe-inspiring when you understand what those stars really are. Acts of kindness aren't smaller when they come from human empathy rather than divine command. They're greater because they're freely chosen. The myths say that without belief, life is meaningless. But the truth is the opposite. A life lived honestly, without leaning on lies, is a life filled with meaning of the deepest kind. Meaning that comes from love, creativity, curiosity, and the desire to leave the world better than we found it. Meaning that doesn't need to be promised. It's created in every choice we make. The myths say that without faith, morality collapses, but we see every day that morality thrives when people act out of empathy rather than fear of punishment. The myths say that without gods, humans are lost. But in reality, we've always been the ones finding our way. Holy lies may still be repeated from pulpits, written into laws, or whispered in the ears of children, but lies remain lies, no matter how many times they're told, and the more people see through them, the weaker they become. The myths survive on silence, on repetition, and on fear of asking the wrong question. But once the question is asked, once someone dares to say, "What if this isn't true?" the spell begins to break. And breaking that spell doesn't leave a void. It opens a door to a world where meaning doesn't need to be borrowed from ancient books, where morality doesn't need to be enforced by threats, where hope doesn't need to rest on fantasies. A world where wonder, compassion, and truth are enough. And the more people walk through that door, the more obvious it becomes. The holy lies were never necessary. They were never the source of love or kindness or progress. They were only stories that once held power. But that power fades the moment we stop mistaking them for truth. So the choice isn't between despair and belief. It's between living in illusion and living in reality, between clinging to myths and building a future that doesn't need them. The lies may be old, but the truth has always been here, and it's stronger, brighter, and far more liberating than any myth could ever be.